I now have a 10-day streak learning Czech on Duolingo, and I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of new suffixes. If you're finding me for the first time, hi. I'm testing out what it's like to learn a language using Duolingo alone. This isn't a method I would recommend, but I was curious to see just how far it could take me. What I'm finding is that beyond the very basic level, the lack of explanation is causing a real problem. It's one thing to learn basic vocabulary the way that Duolingo teaches it, or even pronunciation, except that I don't quite trust the robotic-sounding voices to be accurate. It's another thing entirely to try to learn grammar this way. I'm about halfway through Unit 10. Since my last update, I've covered Unit 6, Describe Things, Unit 7, Describe People, Unit 8, Ask Questions, Unit 9, Use the Plural, and now Unit 10, Talk About Names. That's quite a bit of information, and honestly, it's starting to get overwhelming. So here's what I've managed to figure out. First of all, plural nouns don't have anything as easy as just adding an S in English. I'm assuming that there's some kind of pattern for it, but as far as what that might be, I don't know. There are a lot of different ways, it would seem, in which the word can change to make it a plural. This is one area where Duolingo is definitely not sufficient. I guess after getting it wrong enough times you eventually would remember, at least for individual words. But some explanation of what suffix is added in what context would make it a lot easier. Likewise, adjectives pretty clearly have both number and gender, but 6 different possible endings, masculine, feminine, and neuter, singular and plural for each of those, are not easy to keep track of, to say the least. I feel like a chart and flashcards would be very helpful. One thing that surprised me a little bit is that I've been having trouble remembering to put adjectives before the noun. Now, you might think this would be really easy because it works the same way as in English, but I think I'm instinctively bringing in French word order where the adjective is usually after the noun. French is by far my strongest second language. I also know a little bit of German, and I've noticed that when I don't know a word in German, it's often the French word that comes to mind. Using one foreign language seems to somehow tap into the other. So I don't think it's all that surprising that the same thing would happen in Czech, just kind of annoying in this case. Another thing that I've noticed is that surnames in Czech seem to be gendered. I'm getting this from examples like Novotná and Novotný, for instance. I know that Russian also does this, so I'm not too surprised, since Russian and Czech are both Slavic languages. But this is another area where I think it would be better to have some kind of brief explanation. There's no way you can assume that just about anybody who does this course would know this. It's something that depends very much on what languages you speak and what cultures you're familiar with. Which brings me to another point that I want to make, namely that Duolingo is focused entirely on the mechanics of the language and doesn't provide much cultural context. I learned French in a classroom setting, and I learned it alongside a lot of information about France and other Francophone countries. Their history, their literature, their way of life, their cultural values and norms, and so on. I wouldn't expect an app like Duolingo to provide all of that, but in some cases, language and culture are very closely intertwined. It would be difficult to navigate even basic interactions in French, for instance, without first learning when to use the informal singular pronoun tu and when to use the more formal vous. Is there anything comparable in Czech that I'm missing? I don't know. I would definitely say this is an area where Duolingo is not sufficient on its own. Anyway, that's all that I've got for right now. I definitely plan on going for at least a month, possibly 2, before I decide to bring in other resources or just call it quits. I do want to see where this how does it work to use Duolingo only experiment takes me over more than just 10 days, although after 10 days I'm already beginning to see that, yeah, Duolingo is definitely not sufficient on its own.